So to introduce myself, I'm Ross Nichols. I run the Salisbury Coaching Circle, which is part of the ICF UK chapter. And to bring the topic to Poetry for Coaching, which is what we're here to talk about, it all started in 2022 when I had a simple networking chat with somebody we'd met on LinkedIn. And I just mentioned in passing that I enjoyed using poetry in my coaching. And I shared the observation that some of the coaches in my network were sharing really great poems and the stories behind them on social media. And I just thought these were, I was thinking out loud, saying, wouldn't it be good to get these together and collect them as a resource for the profession? As any good coach would, she says, well, what's stopping you? And that was a real ooh moment, because I realized that nothing was stopping me. And in that moment, I gave myself permission to launch this project. If you're watching this recording, Hazel Martin, thank you for the question. So there's the book cover. I launched the project at Salisbury International Coaching Week. I was running it every year until 2022. And via social media, I gathered together a group of coach poets who became my co-editors. We put the word out on our own networks, and we collected together 160 poems and stories from 41 coach poets. And we selected 111 of them. We published in November last year with the title Poetry for Coaching, Transformation Through Verse. So that's what happens when you think out loud. Be careful what you wish for. Why poetry for coaching? Well, people in all walks of life can become stuck and held back by difficult experiences, and it's not always obvious to know where to find the right support. The power of poetry is one way to help people move beyond their existing understanding, to consider new perspectives and learn new ways of looking at a situation. Poetry can engage us and convey layers of meaning with brevity and elegance, which takes us beyond the simple meaning of the words. It can touch us deeply in a very few words, and storytelling adds richness and context to the poems. As Philip Pullman, who's the author of his Dark Materials, says, poetry is not a fancy way of giving you information. It's an incantation. It is actually a magic spell. It changes things. It changes you. That's certainly my experience. So what is it? It's simply the use of poetry to support a client. It can be a poem from a well-known poet, an unknown poet, or even from the coach themselves. And it doesn't have to be a complete poem. It may simply be a line or two. For example, if somebody was saying to me, a client was saying, I just don't have time for anything. I don't have time to smell the roses. I might just throw in a line like, what is this world if full of care we have no time to stop and stare? That's poetry for coaching. It just gives them a little breather to think about what they're going through. So how does it work? From early in my coaching career, I use poems in my coaching sessions. This could be a sharing of an insight, thought, feeling, a comment in the moment, without any attachment to it being right or appropriate. And the ICF coaching competence here is evokes awareness, which is defined as evokes expanded thinking about self and situation. So I do think it's entirely congruent with the coaching competencies. At the master coach level, the ICF talks about the coach sharing easily and freely what is so for the coach without attachment. And this links to what is known in psychology and in coaching supervision. I'm sure there are some supervisors amongst us here. What the supervisors and psychologists call transference and parallel processing. The client transfers past experiences onto the coaching relationship. Past patterns are recreated by the client and the coach. And in my view, this is likely to be what gives rise to thoughts, feelings, intuitions in a coaching session. We all have them. And while this is a master level coaching competence, there is absolutely nothing to stop new coaches using their intuition, including sharing poems. That's how I started, provided it serves the client's agenda. New coaches have an advantage. They have beginner's mind. So I would say to all coaches, trust yourself and share easily and freely what is so for you with your client without attachment. Be that a poem, be that a story, an intuition, a comment, a feeling, a wacky idea. In 2018, I began to write my own poems, and I sometimes share these with my clients, which generally goes down quite well. Now, there's no shortage of great poetry from well-known poets. We've got Shakespeare, we've got Rumi, Hafiz, and so on. And these can all be useful to support personal transformation and healing. Some coaches use poems written by other people. Some coaches write their own poems, which they also use. It doesn't matter how you do it. But I do think poetry by coaches has a special value. I mean, nobody goes into coaching straight from education. There's no careers advisor saying, doctor, lawyer, accountant, engineer, life coach. It doesn't happen like that. You hit the wall somewhere, you have a difficult experience, you get some support, you think, hey, there's something in this here. I'd like to be a coach or whatever it is, a helping professional. And coaches almost invariably overcome difficult life experiences. Those coaches who are also poets are simply sharing their insights and learnings through those poems and stories. So I do think poetry by coaches can provide inspiration for people who want to learn from others who've been through those sorts of experiences and now want help on their journey too. So what if you do use poetry in your coaching? What happens? I think there are 9 ways that I've noticed how poetry can help a client. So it can help clients to connect to other people's experience, to gain insight into their own experience, to be present to their own emotions and go deeper into themselves, to reframe their experience, to gain fresh perspectives, to provoke new ways of thinking about self and situation, to evoke their uniqueness, to equip themselves emotionally and spiritually for the current stage of their life journey, and to realize that they are not alone and that others have walked the same path. Additionally, poetry can be used for reflective practice, and this is one of the competence elements that was added when the ICF competences were refreshed a few years back, with a new competence number 2, embodies a coaching mindset, which makes explicit that reflective practice is now part of embodying a coaching mindset. So here's another tool you can use for reflective practice. Now, I mentioned the stories. What about the stories? I think there's a synergy between a poem and its story. The story not only adds context and richness to the poem, but combining poems and stories heightens the impact of both. The story can unlock new meaning in the poem and vice versa. And the story can often be insightful in its own right. Some people read the book and they find themselves drawn to the stories more than the poems. So that's what I think you gain from it. But here's what a client said about the benefits of being coached by a coach, which is myself, who uses poetry in their coaching practice. And this is what they said when I asked them for feedback. Poetry in my coaching sessions has helped me to see things at a deeper level, reflecting back to me something I need to understand, accept, or shift. There are times when the poem captures the essence of my feelings, or it may describe the situation and give it new meaning. My experience of hearing poetry as a client is that the message helps me to have a focus or an affirmation to refer back to. At other times, it is the pure beauty of some of the poems that touch a nerve and mark a moment. Poems potentially offer a reframe, metaphor, or affirmation. In my opinion, because they go deeper, they can stir up feelings, leading to clarity or sometimes more emotion. My view is that poetry and coaching is meaningful when its application is appropriate in the moment. And that's very much how I do it. It's spontaneous. I don't think about it in advance. It just comes up and think, oh, I might just share a line here or a verse or a particular poem or offer it. So that's what the client gains. But let's not neglect the coach here. Poetry is a resource for coaches as well as they develop on their coaching journey. And I find reading poetry to be helpful for myself when I need to ground and center myself, if I'm feeling a bit lost, a bit down, a bit flat, a bit in need of inspiration. It helps me to reconnect with my essence, my spirit. I also use it as a part of my journey of personal development. And this is something I'm working on a lot at the moment. I'm on a big self-acceptance kick at the moment. And chapter 3 of the book, the biggest chapter actually in the book, is all about acceptance. And just spending some time sitting quietly reading that through is really helping me. And of course, you can use it for your reflective practice if you're thinking about a client relationship as well. So let's get into some poetry. I'm going to give you a short poem now by Rumi, who was a 13th century Persian poet who lived in what is now called Afghanistan. And I'm taking this from a collection called Gardens of the Beloved. And it's the most beautiful book because it's got this lovely, I think it's Urdu script in it. I don't know if you can see that. It's sort of a beautiful, it's Arabic, Urdu, Persian, I don't know what you call it, but it's lyrical and beautiful to look at, as well as just the English translations. Absolutely gorgeous. This is a short untitled poem. It's only got a few lines. So here we go. Troubled by questions all my life, like a madman I had been knocking at the door. It opened. I had been knocking from inside. So I'd just like you to think about which of the 9 uses of poetry I mentioned might apply to this poem. I'll give you them again there. And I'll just read the poem again to allow you to give a little bit of time to think about that. You've got somebody in the waiting room there, Jane. Troubled by questions all my life, like a madman I had been knocking at the door. It opened. I had been knocking from inside. I think there's one of these 9 that is particularly relevant here. The others may be as well, but just see if you can pick one, and you can write it in the chat. Just put a number in the chat, see what you think. When you start getting some numbers in, Jane, would you start reading them out, please?
Right, there we go with the multitasking. So I've got lots of 2s and 3s, a 4 and a couple of 6s.
I think this is particularly relevant for number 4, to reframe experience. I think it's a classic location reframe. The poet thought he was trying to get in, but in fact, when the door opened, he found he was trying to get out. So it completely changes the meaning. It's a brilliant reframe to my mind. I'm not saying the other ones are irrelevant. They may well apply for you. But for me, the one that stands out is it's a reframe. It's a great reframe. Completely changes the meaning of the experience. So let's have another poem by Rumi. This one actually has a title. It's called The Guest House, a little bit longer. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honourably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So same question. Which of these 9 uses of poetry might apply to this poem? And I think there are 4. So have a little guess, write in the chat. No right or wrong answers, but I think there are 4 that are particularly relevant here. So I'll give you a few moments for that. I'll read the poem again. The Guest House by Rumi. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honourably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So yeah, just have a guess. I think there are 4, but you might see it differently.
So again, we've got lots of people choosing multiple things, which I would be the same. So Monica's 8, 6, 3 and 2, Austin 2, 5, 6 and 8, Virginie 9, 4, 5 and 8, Jonathan 3, 5, 6 and 8.
Oh, we're getting warmer here. You guys are getting the hang of this. So the last one there, Jonathan, bingo, 3, 5, 6 and 8, I think you said. There's a few getting warm there. I think this helps people to be present to their own emotions, to go deeper into themselves. It's all about feeling those feelings, gaining fresh perspectives. This is actually something that could be useful to me. Provoke new ways of thinking about self and their situation, absolutely, and equipping themselves emotionally and spiritually for the current stage of their life journey. So let's have another poem. This time I'm going to pick one from the book, from the anthology, and this is called, or titled, A Familiar Stranger. A fairly short poem. Two dull, lifeless eyes look back at me, a familiar stranger in my bathroom mirror. I ask, who are you? They don't answer. My sense of self is shattered. Never have I felt so lost, alone. Yet here I am wherever this is, adrift with no anchor and no sails, numb in the unknown. This is where my journey begins. So, which of the 9 uses of poetic coaching might apply to this poem? And just write it in the chat. I'll read it again while you're thinking. A familiar stranger. Two dull, lifeless eyes look back at me, a familiar stranger in my bathroom mirror. I ask, who are you? They don't answer. My sense of self is shattered. Never have I felt so lost, alone. Yet here I am wherever this is, adrift with no anchor and no sails, numb in the unknown. This is where my journey begins. And I think there are 3 that are particularly relevant here, but there's no right or wrong answers. So just type in the chat some numbers that you think might be relevant here.
So lots of 2s and 3s and 9s. An 8 and a 7 and a 6. A couple of 8s actually. And a 5.
Cool. So I think the 3 that are particularly relevant: number 1, to connect to others' experience; number 8, to equip self emotionally and spiritually for current stage of life journey; and 9, to realize you're not alone, that others have walked the same path. But as I say, there are no right or wrong answers here. These are just the 3 that I think are most relevant.
What's the name of that poet, Ross?
I'll tell you that later on.
Okay.
Now, I mentioned that this is a book of poems, but also the story behind each poem. I'm going to read you the story now behind this poem. And this is what the coach poet wrote. I did not attend my grandmother's funeral. A soldier in the British Army, I was in Germany and was exhausted after an operational tour. Many years later, while travelling abroad during university holidays, my younger son missed his own grandmother's funeral. Grandma, I will always love you and miss you always, the celebrant read aloud in his absence. As I heard his sentiments, my own delayed grief for my grandmother hit me. As I became fully present to my feelings, 2 poems started to emerge. It was a complete surprise, as I had never written poetry before. This first poem is about identity and a wake-up call to finding myself again when I'd been lost. My wake-up call was on a grey, wet winter's day, a few months after leaving the army. I was wandering around the house, propped up on antibiotics for chronic illness. As I walked into the bathroom, I noticed a strange reflection in the mirror. Who are you? I asked out loud. I knew I'd been struggling, but it was then that I realized the depth and darkness of the hole that I was in. I was no longer a soldier, And I realized that when I'd handed in my ID card, my helmet and my gas mask, I'd handed in my identity, and I had no idea who or what I was. I spent a year at the bottom of this black hole before I began a 2-year quest for wellness. What I learned is shared in my second poem, On Being. These 2 poems are bookends to the most challenging chapter of my life. So I simply invite you now to respond however you wish to, just from your heart, your soul, your gut, to this story. Don't think about it. Just go with the gut. What comes up when you hear this story? And I'll give you a moment just to reflect and type a little response in the chat. Are there any comments coming through, Jen? Can you read them out, please?
Sorry, I forgot I meant to do something. I was so busy reading them to myself. We've got poetry as medicine, pain and hope, sadness but recognizing there is hope, reconnecting with self, heaviness and sense of hope, how we can lose our sense of self in the work we do, coming home to self, how we see ourselves is often strongly associated with our jobs, something to be mindful of as coaches, rediscovery of soul, the importance of preparing for one identity coming to an end and another one emerging, and shared experiences.
Beautiful, thank you. So you've heard the story behind this poem. I want to read the poem again and then ask you how you respond having heard the poem after the story. So this is A Familiar Stranger again.
Can I make a request?
Pardon?
Can I make a request, Ross? Can you
Yeah.
copy and post it into the chat at all?
I think that might be challenging me in terms of my screen,
Okay,
my
no
screen
problem.
share.
No problem. All right.
You might lose me altogether.
Yeah, let's keep you.
We can share them afterwards for sure.
Thank you.
A familiar stranger. 2 dull, lifeless eyes look back at me. A familiar stranger in my bathroom mirror. I ask, who are you? They don't answer. My sense of self is shattered. Never have I felt so lost, alone. Yet here I am wherever this is, adrift with no anchor and no sails, numb in the unknown. This is where my journey begins. So you've heard the story, and now you're hearing the poem. What's different for you, having heard the story behind the poem? So again, just type something in the chat if you're responding differently to the poem now that you've heard the story behind it.
So we've got the poem feeling more emotional the second time around. Sense of betrayal of self. Someone else more able to visualize the person and share emotions with them.
Beautiful. What I noticed about that is the level of emotion that's coming through in the listener is much deeper, having heard the story first and then reading the poem. So we're going deeper by understanding the story. The poem is doing its work, but it's doing more work with the story. This is the synergy between the 2 of them. Lovely, thank you. Now let's hear the second poem, which the coach poet mentioned, On Being. As a brief reminder, he says in his story that this is what he learned on his 2.5-year quest for well-being. So he went through that dark time, and there was a familiar stranger, the bathroom mirror moment. Then downstream, this is what he learned. This is called On Being. What does it mean to be, not do? How can you finally be more you? How do you find a life that you love? How do you find a way to choose? Questions are where it starts. Questions simply to open your heart. Open your heart and let light in. This is how your journey begins. Is it so simple, simply to be? Yes, but that doesn't mean it's easy. Take your time to know yourself. Listen and feel for your inner voice. The road may be long and tough, yet this is a journey to love. Love for yourself, love for others. This is what really matters. What's the secret? How do you start to find a way to open your heart? Sit still and simply be you. See what comes up and embrace it in full. This is your way, your truth, your light. It comes from within, no need to fight. Yes, courage is needed to face your fears, and facing them brings a power to heal. So, let go of others' voices. Simply be you. It's your life. Who are you? Now, this time you've heard the story first, and now you're hearing the poem. How do you respond with this combination, story then poem? What's coming up for you? Just write something in the chat.
So a sense of more experience of empathy and increased ability to walk in their shoes. And someone else sharing about being able to hear the poet's voice more. Less time being needed to process the words and make the connection.
So there's an immediacy. The poem somehow seems to speak more quickly. There's less interpretation. You can just really get it. So again, the synergy between the story and the poem, it has greater impact. Lovely. So breakout room time. If I can ask our host to put us into breakout rooms for 5 minutes or so, unless you want a little bit longer, Jane. But the question here is, how can you use poetry either in your coaching practice or in your business, or both?
I think we can give people a little longer if that's
Yeah,
okay with you, because it's an
absolutely fine.
opportunity to get to know each other as well as to discuss the contemplation. So if I give you all 10 minutes to get to know each other and to explore how you can use poetry in your own practice or business. So I'm going to put you in groups of 3 or 4. Would you like to be included in the breakout rooms, Ross, or would you like a little breather?
It's up to you, Jane. I'm happy either way.
Well, I'll give you the option and then you can elect to go in or to stay here. And then
Perfect, perfect.
okay. Welcome back, everybody. I just want to reassure people that the breakout rooms aren't recorded. I meant to say that earlier and I forgot.
Okay, welcome back. So, let's see if I can get my slides to go on. There we go. So let's have some sharing of what you learned on those 2 questions. How can you use poetry in your coaching practice, or how can you use poetry in your business? You can either write in the chat or raise your hand and speak, or both. Any reflections, questions, reflections and answers coming up? I'll let you manage the hands going up, Jane, if there are any.
I'll just share that we really reflected that we liked how this sort of expressive art unlocks maybe some deeper emotion with the client, and we kind of related it to things that have happened in the past, like an image which might evoke an expression of where a client's at, or a client referring maybe to a song lyric that had really impacted them or really resonated with them. And in the past, I've maybe not gone deep enough. I've not captured that moment and explored it. And so we were thinking along that, in that creative process in the mind of getting a different perspective. But we had lots of questions about how to do it in the moment.
Such as?
So when we're present and listening to the client, how do we bring that poetry in? Because we're not poets, and I think it would, in my mind, I'd be thinking about trying to create a poem rather than being present with the client. So is it something that is a reflective tool? Is it something that's brought into the session from a client's perspective? Yeah, we're really curious around that.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Again, there's no right or wrong answer here. What I just discovered is that, just me being me, I would collect poems that I saw mostly online, to be honest, and occasionally in newspapers, magazines, whatever, and I would just collect them and store them on my computer. And I had my own response to those poems, and somehow during a coaching session, I will spontaneously, it'll pop into my mind, oh yeah, this poem might be relevant right now. So I'll simply offer it and say, hey, I've got a poem that might be relevant here. May I share it with you? And then invariably say yes. And I think in all the years I've been doing it, only once has a client ever said, well, that's all right, but hasn't really made any difference. almost invariably they say, "No, it's really helpful to hear that poem or to read that poem." So that's the spontaneity, the intuitive approach during a session. And sometimes after a session's finished, I think, oh yeah, that poem's relevant for this client's topics today. So I'll email it to them after and say, hey, if it's any use to you, here's a poem that might speak to that. So you can do it however works for you. But I think you have to be interested in poetry in the first place and have a little collection or a pool of poems. And that's what this is for. You know, this is meant to be a resource for the coaching profession. And it's themed around, you know, the themes which are the stuff of coaching: connection, love, acceptance, forgiveness, resilience, and life. So if you're looking for a poem to speak to a particular theme, you can look at a collection such as this that's meant to be providing a resource. So I'll just pause there. How's that landing with you, Evie?
Yeah, that really helps. Thank you. Because we maybe misinterpreted, thinking that we had to come up with a poem for the client. So we were like, oh, we're gonna have to upskill here. But that really makes it relevant about being intuitive to something that you've read or heard that you think you might offer as a perspective for a client. So thank you.
You're welcome. And on that, it's quite funny actually. I once did spontaneously with another coach close my eyes and recite a poem that spoke to their experience, and they said, "Wow, you're some poetic genius. You just composed that there." And no. I've written it before, but I just happened to remember it. That's all. So yeah. Anything else coming up, Jane? Oh, there we've got a hand up, Jonathan.
Ross, I was with Evie. I think the other thing that was very interesting is it might be poetry, it could even be lyrics. So if you intuitively know the lyrics of a song that spring to mind when somebody's discussing something with you, that might be your particular strength and ease of access, as poetry is easily accessible to you. It might be song lyrics. Or I'm also aware of another colleague of mine who used to use pictures and would use those as part of the coaching session because it tends to get beyond it surpasses that barrier of them not wanting to share something, because you get down to an emotional level that is evocative and they are able to relate to it and express themselves so much better and quicker than just systematically trying to help them and work out what's going on. And for them to work out what's going on, this seems to create a shortcut for them really getting emotionally involved with their situation. That's just what sprung to mind for us.
Oh, spot on, Jonathan. And yeah, song lyrics for sure. Quotable quotes, you know, verses, poems. And then we get into there's a whole load of other forms of creative expression which are coming into coaching now. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard of art in coaching. You know, art therapy has become expression through art in coaching. I've been to some workshops on this. Color therapy, use of color is coming into coaching. Many of you will have done a bit of yoga or meditation and breathing. You're familiar with the chakras. They each have a color associated with them. So if somebody, you know, you're just guiding somebody through a visualization and they're getting a strong green, well, that's the heart space. Or if it's a deep, dark purple, then it's the brain, the head, you know. Or deep red, it's their base chakra, you know. Could be something to do with sexuality or libido or something, you know. So it's just another form of creative expression. You're absolutely right. Sometimes I'll say to a client, draw me a picture. And they'll just scribble something down. It could be very revealing. I remember one. She drew a square with a dot in the middle. She was the dot. Insignificant. Didn't see herself as having any significance. These are all forms of creative expression, communication, accessing the deeper side. But I also want to mention the stories. I think storytelling is underrated. So sometimes I will share a personal experience, again, without attachment. I'll say, oh, I remember that once a client was really struggling with very difficult negotiations about a house they were buying or trying to buy and whether it was the right house. And I just told them a story about this house that I bought that really wanted it. And they said, oh, sorry, it's not available anymore. So I kept saying, look, if that deal falls through, we're here, cash buyer, no chain, you know. And they said, no, it's definitely, it's gone. And eventually, about a year later, they rang us up and said, yeah, it's back on the market. So it was like, it was meant to be, you know, and we're still here 20 odd years later. So that's just a little story. So song lyrics, stories, poems, verses, quotable quotes, anything like that can be useful. Shared spontaneity in the moment without attachment. Thank you for your question. Anything else coming up?
We spoke a little bit, Ross, in our group about the opportunity to engage creatively as the conversation has started to kind of go that way, with poems that the client might be supported in creating themselves. So maybe because a metaphor has come into the space, or because they've drawn something, or because there's a particular word that feels really poignant, or that they've surprised themselves at the choice of a word, and an opportunity to kind of go deeper and explore what else might be there. And I shared about how a lot of clients of mine have not thought that they could write poetry, or it was something that, you know, they might have initially felt a bit uncomfortable with. But if I'm brave enough to share that other clients have maybe found it useful, or to give themselves permission for their inner critic to have the day off and see what might happen playfully, then quite often they surprise themselves with what comes out and the meaning that that then holds and the awareness that that evokes. And so before coming across yourself and one of the poets in your book, Frank Balaji, I'd never heard of sharing a poem for someone to then reflect on, or sharing it in the middle of a session. It was more from actually the act of creating it in the moment. So yeah, I just thought I'd also offer that into the space.
That's a lovely extra dimension, thank you. And of course, every now and again, a client will say, yeah, I wrote a poem about this, the very issue which they're bringing to the coaching. So sometimes they are the poet, and you can feel from them what they really have experienced by them reciting their poem to you. That can be amazingly insightful for a coaching session as well. Yeah, wonderful, thank you. I'm going to do the reveal now. I mentioned that 2 poems and a story that were in the book. And somebody, I think you asked me at the start, Jen, who was the poet? Well, it's me. It's my story, and those are my 2 poems. And I chose my own because I can speak to them. You know, I don't feel I'm leaning on anybody else's work then. But now that's my introduction. You know, you know who I am now. You know a bit more about me. Any other questions? If we go beyond, I'll put the next slide up while we chat.
While you're popping the slide up, I just thought I'd check. Usually I close the breakout room for confidentiality. I'm sensing this group feels a little different because of the way in which we're sharing maybe the topic. Would anybody have any objections if I allowed somebody in who's an hour late? Would anybody mind? Okay, just wanted to double check.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
So in summary, we've looked at a number of ways we can use poems and stories in coaching. We've talked about the 9 different purposes, specific purposes like a reframe, connect to other people's experiences, and so on. We've talked about whether you just read a poem and then the story, or the story and the poem, or both, in whichever sequence. How we can use it simply as one form of creative expression, another way of going deep. And you can complement that by storytelling, song lyrics, drawing, color therapy, art therapy, you know, sound therapy, anything you like. So it's just one form of creative expression that might help to, as Jonathan said, short circuit the session, get to the emotion more quickly, go deeper, faster and quicker than you might otherwise. Those are the contact details. We're on Facebook in 2 places: Poetry for Coaching, for just for routine announcements, and we also have a Poetry for Coaching community if you want to interact with our poets, our editors, and so on. We're on Instagram, Poetry for Coaching, and there you've got my email address there, and also you're very welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. There's much more to come this year on the Poetry for Coaching project. We've done some podcasts, we're doing these workshops with coaching groups, we're trickling out social media posts all the time on this to add more flavour. We're highlighting different poets, we've got 41 of them, and some of their work. like Frank Bludge's that Jane mentioned. So yeah, there's a constant stream of stuff coming out around Poetry for Coaching, and who knows where the project's going to take us next. We don't have a set boundary for it. Yeah, we've published a book, but what's next? We're open to that. We don't know. So there's the book cover again. Any other general questions now? We'll throw it open, Jane, for Q&A on anything you want to talk about.
Anybody have any questions about poetry in coaching?
Where can you get the book, Julia? In all the usual places, Amazon, all online, you know, Waterstones, Barnes and Noble. They're on all, you know, on all the usual places. Not in many bookshops, I don't think, physically yet, anyway, but certainly available online.
I'm wondering, Ross, if people might be up for a bit of spontaneous poetry exploration together.
Ooh, nice. Yeah, anybody got a poem they'd like to share? That would be great to hear.
Well, I'm just noticing Julia's, I can't help but notice Julia's business name. Is that Focus, Fire Up and Flourish? I was just thinking, what if we were all to choose one of those words, whichever one we felt was most resonant, and then use that as the starting point for a poem. In my group, when I talked about bringing poetry in and using it with clients, I'll often give them a bit of a framework just to help them get started, if it's something that they're not used to doing. And I'll often suggest if you write one word and then 2 words and then 3 words and then 2 words and then 1 word, and there you have a poem. Doesn't need to rhyme. Give your inner critic the day off. See what happens. Should we give that a little bit of wild writing for, say, 5 minutes and then see where we end up? But feel free to go off that framework and write whatever you come up with. Okay. Okay. I'm wondering, as some of you are finishing off your poems, we have a little more time, and I think there's something powerful about poetry being brought to life, just as Ross read poems to us. I'm wondering if you might like to take your poems into breakout rooms, meet another couple of people, share your poems out loud and see what happens for you as you do that. Give me a little wave if you're up for that. I'll understand if not, it's just an idea, again, spontaneously. Okay, great. I will create the breakout rooms. Welcome back in, everybody. I'd like to bring and sprinkle in a little bit of appreciation from our group, Ross, for what you've evoked, at least in the group that I was in just now, and I know definitely in the one that I was in earlier as well.
I'm going to jump right in. Thank you, first of all, for that. That's lovely to hear. But we just heard a poem in our group that was just absolutely brilliant. And if it had been offered as a poem for this anthology, Poetry for Coaching, it would definitely been in there. Andrea, can you read us your poem again, please? It was just so good. Putting you on the spot here, but it's worth it.
Wow. Okay, I'll be brave. This is quite something for me, but sure. I was also going to say it would be lovely if we could have more than 30 seconds heads up to come back from the breakout room.
Sure, I'll bear that in
Not
mind.
that you asked for feedback, but
Yeah.
it was quite jarring. And someone was in the middle of talking and 30 seconds is like just so quick.
All good, all good. Appreciate any feedback. So yes, we'll give longer next time. It was all very spontaneous and it just happened to be the amount that was already on the timer from earlier. I'll bear it in mind. So thank you, Andrea.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to do it, even though I'm very nervous. Okay. Fire up your passion. It's in there, I promise. Don't think it needs to be perfect. The mess is part of the process. Where does your fire sit? When did you last feel it? What are the prerequisites? Or do you just need to sit with it? Dance with it, speak to it, taste it, create it. Why so much expectation? What about right now? Isn't fire primal? Aren't you an animal with fiery center, an instinctual knowing? Maybe this floppy fake world puts out your flames and nature brings them to light. Maybe some company leaves you feeling put out. And so don't give too much of your fire away. Use it intentionally, feed it with love, for a fire doesn't burn without a spark to start it. And it needs to be stoked, but not forced.
Wow.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Fabulous. So Jane, over to you. Do you want to, is there anything you want to manage from the different breakout rooms, get some more poems, or?
Well, there's time and space if anybody else feels inclined to share.
Yeah, let's hear some more. That'd be great. Reflections or poems or both.
I have a reflection that I really enjoyed this session, and also the last, especially the last breakout room where we shared our poems. And writing a poem on the spot, for me, if you had asked me like maybe a few months ago, I would have said it's my worst nightmare. But actually it was really nice, and also listening to the others, and so it was a very nourishing experience. And also just reflecting on what is a poem, what is poetry, and we can all make it in our own way.
Yeah, we were talking about that in our group, and I think I've thought about it a lot. And many bits of lyrical prose could simply be split into lines and grouped in verses, and they would be a poem. A poem is just something that's written in verses. It doesn't have to rhyme. It doesn't have to have proper punctuation. So it's just lines structured into verses. That's all a poem is. Thank you. Lovely. Anybody else?
Not my poem, but there's this guy that sits on the South Bank. He's called the Poet for Hire. He's not on any social media. He's got a little old-fashioned typewriter, and you can literally just go up to him and say, write me a poem about whatever it is, or a topic. And if ever you get a chance, he's kind of like outside the Tate Modern, that sort of strip, and he's pretty much there every week. So if you're ever down on the South Bank and you want to try something a little creative, we'll see what he comes up with. It's a real treat. Yeah, Poet for Hire. And you literally get your poem written in like old-fashioned typewriter on a piece of paper.
Wonderful.
Love that.
Yeah, and somebody mentioned in the chat, Andrew, you mentioned John O'Donoghue. Yeah, absolutely love John O'Donoghue's work. Irish poet, utterly beautiful the work, lyrical work.
And especially his interview with Krista Tippett on the On Being podcast, because John O'Donoghue's since passed, but there's an interview, and I've probably listened to that interview like 5 times just to hear his voice and to hear him speak his work. So if anyone's interested, it's very, very beautiful.
Can you say that podcast again, please?
On Being.
Gosh, that's the
Krista Tippett.
same title as my poem, isn't it?
Yeah, I actually thought of that when you read your poem. Yeah.
I'm going to have to listen to that then. Thank you. What else is coming up in the room?
We've got poems brewing in their heads for us. Well, we better draw things to a close, or we'll then end up being at time. So thank you, Ross, so much for joining us. It's been an absolute joy and pleasure, and been really interesting hearing your build and the experience of contemplating stories aligned with poems and the difference that makes, and thinking about the competencies in relation to sharing of poems in the coaching space. It's been fabulous having you. So thank you very, very much. And I'm wondering what you would like to check out with, perhaps what you're taking away that's been most insightful for you today, or what's going to stay with you beyond this session. Feel free to come off mute and share. For me, I think it's going to be the difference that a story and then a poem makes, because I wasn't expecting the significant difference in the sensations in my body that brought, which was quite interesting for me. Feel free just to unmute and share, should you wish to, or pop in the chat.
I did have an insight, Jane. So just like you, for me, listening to the poem, it felt much deeper after hearing the story. But when I was in my little group just then talking about the little poems, my insight was that it is funny how if a word really resonates with me emotionally, then I find that the poetry will flow, or at least verses will flow. But actually, when I'm trying and the word might not be resonating with me in the moment, then I struggle to write it. And that was quite an insight. That was quite insightful for me to realize that perhaps poetry for me is more emotional.
Thank you. Yeah. I also wondered in terms of working with neurodivergent clients, and sometimes people's grasp on language and the meaning of words, if they're able to see a poem, sometimes that can impact on how they're able to receive it. So some of us can tune in auditorily quite easily and drop into a poem, and for others it's difficult to do that unless we see a poem. And so thinking about how we might accommodate for that with clients, depending on what we know of them. Yeah, some other thoughts. Okay, we will leave it there then. And Patricia's also shared about poetry unlocking the emotion behind the narrative in our head, and Evie too sharing about poems unlocking deeper emotions. Definitely an opportunity for us as coaches to evoke more awareness and go deeper with our clients by bringing in poetry as a tool. So thank you very much again, Ross, for coming and sharing in this space, and look forward to connecting with you again soon, and also with everybody else here, either on the next meetup or at some other stage, who knows. Take care.
It's been a great pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you all very much.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.